It looks like someone new has decided to dive into the world of Rapture, as Netflix recently announced an upcoming film adaptation of the seminal game Bioshock to release sometime in the near future. If that sounds all too familiar, that's because it should. Since Bioshock's groundbreaking release in 2007, studios have been trying to bring that same success to the big screen, but sadly it's never came to be. Until possibly now, as it appears that Netflix is trying to choose the impossible. But I am Jesse Earl, and I'm here to ask you a question. What do we want in a Bioshock movie? A movie where an artist would not fear the censor, where a streaming service would not be bound by petty morality, where the great would not be constrained by the small. And with the sweat of your brow, Bioshock can become your movie as well! Sorry, I got a little bit carried away there. Anyways, would you kindly join me as we briefly go over the failed history of the Bioshock film franchise, and then go over what we would want to see in Netflix's upcoming adaptation. Bioshock is hands down one of the most iconic series in gaming. Released as the spiritual successor to the classic System Shock 2, Bioshock, helmed by Ken Levine, rocked the entire medium with its incredible art direction, unique upgradable plasmid mechanic, deep environmental storytelling, rich characters, and political themes that all work together to tell one of the most thought-provoking stories in gaming that all culminated in one of the most mind-bending twists in modern memory. Bioshock was so beloved that it became the go-to example for gamers to point at to argue that yes, indeed, games were art.
The burden of the artist is to capture.
Which was still an ongoing debate at the time, with mainstream opinion being that video games are all just murder, blackjack, and hookers.
But if you have a kid, let's say you've got a video game, and it involves maiming, raping, murdering, dismembering.
Which, to be fair, a predominant amount of them were, but you know, artistic blackjack and hookers.
CJ a player tonight.
Bioshock was set in the underwater city of Rapture, built by industrial capitalist Andrew Ryan in order to create a place where the best of society, i.e. the rich, pompous, and privileged, could escape the horrid anchor that was society and the petty rabble below, and build a grander city where they wouldn't be subject to things like, you know, ethics.
Where the scientists would not be bound by petty morality, where the great would not be constrained by the small.
Which quickly descended into civil war with its inhabitants addicted to genetic tampering serums. You know, as you do. As Jack, you enter the city after a plane crash and are forced to deal with the denizens of this dystopia. With the franchise's runaway success and intense visual style and storytelling, it's by no means a shock that Hollywood attempted to try to capitalize on the success with a big budget adaptation. Take-Two announced a partnership with Universal Studios to produce a film directed by Gore Verbinski, who was fresh off his success with the first 3 Pirates of the Caribbean films. However, the film was put on ice in 2010 due to its ballooning budget, an almost necessity given the series' unique setting and art direction. I like to think it's sadly because they decided not to shop at the Circus of Values!
Welcome to the Circus of Values!
Sorry, had to do it. That sound has been in my head since 2007. Verbinski eventually dropped out as director to helm Rango, but he continued to fight as producer for the film to be given an R rating, which left many studios hesitant to jump onto the project given the typically low box office return for such R-rated films, like with the disappointing performance of Zack Snyder's Watchmen. Eventually, Verbinski and Bioshock creator Ken Levine abandoned the project, with Levine stating, "I don't need to compromise. How many times in life do you not need to compromise?" Definitely channeling his inner Andrew Ryan there. However, while the film was cancelled, much of Verbinski's visual work got incorporated into his next project, A Cure for Wellness, starring the Green Goblin himself, Dane DeHaan. While the film was set in a mental hospital, it surprisingly retained some of the same distinctive look and themes of choice and control found in the original game. And as someone who saw the film in theaters, I actually think it's not that bad. Think of it kind of like Bioshock meets Shutter Island. It's by no means fantastic, but it's also not as horrid as its critical reception would have you believe. Though it does culminate in a very video game-like boss fight, which is weird. Apparently even Bioshock-inspired projects can't have a satisfying final boss. But that brings us to today, with Netflix, which has had strong success with video game adaptations in the TV world with the likes of Arcane, Castlevania, Cuphead, and the game and novel-inspired The Witcher, has decided to have a go at Bioshock. So that brings us back to that big question. If Netflix is going to use the sweat of its brow to make a new Bioshock movie, what do we want to see in it? Number 1, political themes.
No, says the man in Washington, it belongs to the poor. No, says the man in the Vatican, it belongs to God. No, says the man in Moscow, it belongs to everyone.
Now, personally, I love thoughtful political themes in all of my art, but even the most ardent of folks who yell about "keep politics out of my gaming" have got to admit that Bioshock basically requires a strong political viewpoint. The original Bioshock directly confronted writer Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism, and her arguments that complete self-interest is morally correct, altruism is actually harmful, and that unfettered capitalism is the best system, apparently. Yeah, Rand had ideas, let's just say. And Bioshock doesn't make its deconstruction of these ideas subtle, with direct references to Rand's work like the Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged littered throughout Rapture, right down to Andrew Ryan's name directly alluding to Rand herself. Even more so, the other games in the series continued these strong political themes, with Bioshock 2 providing a dissection of concepts of collectivism through Karl Marx in stark contrast to Rand's individualism, showcasing the franchise's willingness to engage with the complexity and grayness of both sides of these ideologies.
But the parasites say, no, your art must serve the cause. Your ideals endanger the people.
Yet, even more directly and controversially, Bioshock Infinite itself confronted how intertwined ideals of American exceptionalism, white supremacy, and nationalism also intermix with concepts of individualism versus collectivism in the United States. So yeah, Bioshock has never been exactly apolitical. And so Netflix's adaptation would be doomed from the start if it tried to provide a more tepid interpretation of the game's themes. While it shouldn't preach to the viewer, neither should it be afraid to dive into the moral complexity of the franchise's politics.
This is what they want, brothers. To keep you so hungry, you can't speak but to think.
Number 2, a revamped story. All that being said, while the themes of Bioshock should remain true to its political roots, the actual plot and story needs to be changed to suit the medium. One of Bioshock's greatest contributions to gaming was its famous twist revealed in the game's final act.
A man chooses. A slave obeys.
And while I won't spoil the specifics here, the important thing to note with that twist is that it only works because it's in a video game. The game uses a meta-commentary of how perception of player agency is actually being manipulated and guided in order to reflect back upon its ideas of how no one really has agency under objectivist and capitalist systems seen in the rest of the world of Rapture. But that only works because you, the player, have been playing the game and felt like you were making choices in the game story when you actually weren't. And this will most likely be the biggest hurdle for the filmmakers to tackle, because if they simply try to translate the twist from the game one-to-one, it won't be as close to as powerful as it was in its original context due to the shift from a more active medium to a passive one like film. As a result, it might be better for the movies to focus on a different aspect or even completely new part of the Bioshock story. Perhaps seeing the fall of Rapture itself might be a stronger narrative to follow, one which will better fit a movie's ability to fully control an audience's viewing experience. Number 3, an artist's vision.
Get them out of here!
There shall be no failure on my canvas.
While Ken Levine is a controversial figure in the gaming world due to allegations of him potentially fostering a toxic workplace culture that needs to be addressed and confronted, it is unquestionable that the original Bioshock game did have a unique creative vision. In fact, it's actually an interesting connection to make between how the original game questions individualism with how often Bioshock's unique world gets highlighted only through the lens of one creator like Levine, despite it being the work of hundreds of developers working together. Similarly though, that means that any Bioshock movie itself should have a strong creative vision behind it. Many of Netflix's films sometimes tend to have that feeling that they were made by an algorithm rather than an actual strong creative impulse, with the studio seeming to worry more about what's marketable rather than what's interesting to watch, which would go against the entire ethos of a Bioshock story. As a result, whoever steps into the director's chair should have a strong voice in the film's final creative vision, yet one which can work collaboratively with a team of individuals to make something truly amazing, like the best directors do. Number 4, an Armin Shimerman cameo. Okay, this may be just the Trekkie in me, but one of the best parts of the original Bioshock game is actor Armin Shimerman's excellent voiceover work as Andrew Ryan.
I am Andrew Ryan, and I'm here to ask you a question. Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow?
famous for bringing the capitalist Ferengi bartender with a heart of gold Quark to life in Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
But you know what's really frightening? If you drink enough of it, you begin to like it. It's insidious. Just like the Federation.
It would be awesome for the movie to pay homage to the man in the lighthouse with a small cameo, similar to Nolan North's brief appearance in the recent Uncharted film. Number 5, strong physical art direction. This kind of goes without saying, but easily the most standout part of every single Bioshock game is its unique sense of place. Whether it's Rapture's underwater high society style or the steampunk city in the sky setting of Columbia, Bioshock has always evoked its setting through strong art direction and environmental storytelling, something that should transfer over to any film adaptation. We should truly feel like Rapture, or wherever the movie is set, is a real place, which would require the movie's effects being as practical as possible. While certainly an underwater city would require a heavy amount of CGI to pull off, it would ultimately be disappointing for the film to feel like it was made completely in a green screen studio somewhere. Number 6, Big Daddies. Speaking of practical effects though, what the film adaptation will most definitely need is some big daddies, like the biggest of daddies, because they're the game's most iconic element, and they need to be scary. Given their popularity, it would be easy to make the big daddies feel underwhelming, so it's up to the film to remind us why they were so iconic in the first place. A big daddy needs to have a sense of heft, presence, and threat to them, and we should feel that these guys are not something to be messed with. If done right, Big Daddies could become just as iconic on the big screen as they are in the video game world, meaning that they also need to have a creepy little sister to accompany them as well. Number 7, a mind-blowing experience. While I spoke earlier about the need for Bioshock to eschew just copy-pasting the game's final twist, it would also be a missed opportunity if the game didn't take a chance to really mess with our minds a bit. Each entry in the Bioshock series has had a truly mind-f***ing moment, one that left us reeling with its potential interpretations, as well as scratching our heads trying to figure out what it all means. It's honestly just part of the Bioshock brand at this point. So while it may be a hard lift and ask for the movie to both try something new and deliver a mind-blowing moment, it wouldn't really feel like Bioshock if it didn't manage to pull it off.
I never find that as satisfying as I'd imagined.
Chin up, there's always next time.
I suppose there is.
Number 8, connections to the games. Now, this final entry may be my most controversial opinion, and one I could be talked out of, but I think that a Bioshock movie should actually be in canon with the games themselves. Many video game adaptations today have actively distanced themselves from the universe of the games. For example, the upcoming Paramount Plus Halo series is set in a totally new timeline from the games, and the recent Uncharted movie seems to have done the same, being a sort of prequel reboot hybrid of the franchise's most iconic story moments. In fact, the one time where a video game movie was actually set in the same universe of the games was 2016's Assassin's Creed movie starring Michael Fassbender. And it didn't go over super well. Though I will say it's by no means a great movie, but I will actually fight for the 18th century scenes from that movie. They're actually pretty awesome and a great translation of the Assassin's Creed games to movies. Regardless though, one of the joys of the Bioshock universe, and by the way, big spoilers here, so skip ahead a few seconds if you don't want any spoilers for the Bioshock franchise, is that it's actually multiple universes. All any Bioshock story requires is a lighthouse, a man, and a city. Outside of that, the worlds are your oyster, and I think the movie will have a cool opportunity to put itself in direct conversation with the games. While I don't necessarily need the movie to somehow cross over with the events of the games, it would be cool to see brief nods to the interconnected nature of the Bioshock franchise. And that is my list for everything that I want in a Bioshock movie. Besides Sander Cohen. I also want Sander Cohen in a Bioshock movie because that man is simply wonderful.
Oh, there's no room in Rapture anymore for the artist.
Oh, and the Lutece twins too. They're also great. Some of my favorite characters in all of gaming. Man, there are so many things that I want in this movie. Anyways, I hope you see what I mean, because regardless, until the movie arrives, we'll have to keep debating what we want in it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you agree with my list? Or do you think that I don't have the vision of a true autist? And don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date on all the news you need to know right here on GameSpot.